Welcome, everyone, to our This Life Counts Suicide Awareness and Prevention Talk. My name is Krista Klee, and I'm the chairperson for the Young Professionals at Bergen Newbridge Medical Center Foundation. I want to start this talk by thanking the People Are There Foundation and Darian Eletto of BNBMC for being here. Our speakers tonight will be talking about their experiences with suicide, signs to look out for, and healthy coping mechanisms. On average, there are 130 suicides each day. Today's conversation will be the start of some of your journeys to have this conversation with your loved ones, colleagues, students, and friends. This conversation to some people may not be easy to have, but with others, it could be an easier one. I am currently a crisis text line counselor. With every conversation I have with those who text in, regardless of the reason, I ask if they are having thoughts of suicide. Some might think this would give someone the idea to go through with it, but the truth is it could help save someone's life by asking the question. Being open to hearing how someone is thinking and feeling could be the difference between losing someone. At Bergen Newbridge Medical Center, we see the whole person for who they are and the struggles they may be having. This conversation coincides with our Creating a Vibe to Heal week before our 5K to bring awareness to mental health and substance abuse. This 5K was started to help bring awareness and break the stigma on mental health and raise funds for the Mental Health Units and Recovery Center at BNBMC. If you're interested in signing up, please visit our website, newbridgehealth.org/foundation to sign up for our 5K. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So first we have Serena Greco. She's a part of the People Are There Foundation. She is their president, and a fun fact about her is she is a huge fan of Billy Joel, and she has been to 5 of his concerts. Next, we have Joe Turner, who's a part of the People Are There Foundation. He's the head of their business relations, and a fun fact about him is he sleeps to metal music. And finally, we have Darian Eletto. She's from Bergen Newbridge Medical Center. She's a wellness navigation specialist. And fun fact, she restored a 1967 Chevy Camaro with her family. So now we will be having Serena Greco and Joe Turner speak on behalf of the People Are There Foundation.
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Serena Greco, and I am the president of People Are There Foundation.
I'm Joe Turner. I am head of business relations. Thank you so much for having us, and we're very much looking forward to this talk.
You can go to the next, yeah. You can go to the next. So what is PAT? So obviously People Are There, PAT. People Are There is a nonprofit organization based in Waldwick, New Jersey, dedicating to spreading awareness of the mental health and suicide epidemics that are plaguing people of all ages and backgrounds in this country. The foundation was created in honor of our friend Patrick Brown, who tragically passed away by suicide on June 6, 2016. Our goal is to educate people of all ages, raise money for education efforts and care programs, to advocate for systemic changes, and to eliminate the stigma that surrounds mental health wherever we can. Since our inception in November 2019, we have held a number of fundraisers and even started a mental health education program with our local high school, with more schools reaching out to do the same. Our mission statement at People Are There. People Are There is a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness of mental health issues and to combating the stigma associated with it. We aim to not only educate people young and old about the need to combat the mental health crisis, but to also be a force for change in our communities. Joe, if you want to take this one.
Sure. So like Serena said, the whole reason we're doing this is because of our friend Pat. Pat was just an incredible individual who really just made a difference in everybody's lives that we talked to. He was one of a kind, you know. He always had something a smart remark to say. He'd always make you laugh. He just put a smile on your face. And he wasn't just, a friend of ours. He was a loving son, brother, cousin, nephew, student athlete. And he was always just, he would be a rock for people to lean on, when other people would have problems. And so it came as a shock to us when we woke up and heard the news of his passing. He was a silent sufferer. From the outside, he portrayed himself as someone who, like I mentioned, he was the one to talk to you about your problems. He was the one to make people feel better. He would inspire laughs from people and smiles. And so it was just hard to fathom when we got the news that this was the case. It didn't seem like reality. And that's why we're here. We want to shed light on those who are also silent sufferers and people who are open. And we want people to be able to, be comfortable with talking about how they're feeling. We want to break this stigma that keeps people from speaking their truth and keeps people thinking that what they're feeling is not okay, because it is absolutely okay. Next slide. So I don't know if Serena, you would want to go first, talk about how Pat's passing has affected you personally in your life.
Yeah, I'll go first. So as stated before, Pat passed away in June of 2016. And I just remember waking up to hearing that my friend took his own life. And I think even to this day, it's still something that's very shocking to me. It's something I still kind of don't want to believe in a sense. But when it did happen, it obviously affected my life. It affected our friend group's life. It affected our whole community's lives. And I just always knew something had to be done. Something needed to be changed. I think in my life personally, I view life in such a different way. I view life, I like how I speak to people, how I treat other people. Just knowing that my friend was going through something that none of us knew, just, now thinking about it, it scares me. And it's just something that I never thought I would experience. But with experiencing it, I've decided, obviously, I started this foundation not knowing I would start this foundation at all, but I started this foundation. I have taken courses on mental health, continuing to educate myself with mental health, just so that I can bring a more awareness to others, because it needs to be talked about. As Joe was saying before, like, this needs to be talked about. We need to start shining light on mental health itself, especially with the world and time that we're living in today. I obviously wish Pat never left, but it's something that's definitely changed my life. And I think Joe can say the same too. It's just like, it's going to be 5 years next month. And, we're continuing to honor him, do everything we can just because of his life itself. So it's definitely been a rough 5 years, I think. Still, I don't think it's ever going to get easier, but there's so much that myself, Joe, my team, and just our friend group and community itself we've changed so much. And this has definitely taken a toll on us, but also just opened our eyes a little more on what we can do and how much awareness we can bring to everyone.
Yeah. Wow. It really just hit me when you said it. Like, I already knew it was going to be 5 years, but just hearing it, it really hit. But yeah, Pat, Sri and I both grew up with Pat since we were in kindergarten. And Pat even lived across the street from me for years. So I was very close with Pat. I was over there all the time in his house and everything. So I remember when my parents woke me up, you never expect to wake up to something so shocking. And that's what I was when they told me. I was shocked. I was frozen. My mind went blank. I was just trying to process everything. And the first words that came out of my mouth was like, not Pat. No way. Because like I said before, he was this person who was just filled with so much joy. He was willing to listen to you, and you wouldn't think that he was carrying this weight on his shoulders, this that he had these demons that he was battling. Um, and a lot of times, and I've heard this, and then I experienced it, that when you lose someone that way, a thought that tends to come up is, how could you not have seen it? There must have been something you could do. And that's something I experienced myself, especially as someone who struggled with mental health and suicidal ideation growing up. I hit myself, I kind of took it on myself even harder. Like, how could you have not seen, like I said to myself, how could you not have seen this? You went through this yourself. And I just kept hammering. And that's why that was especially hard when I started to think that. And it also made me think of all the times where Pat needed a ride or something and I wasn't available. I kept thinking, could that have been the day he was going to open up to me? But the thing is, we can't think that way because, one, our loved one who passed would not want us to take things out on ourselves. Pat loved us and he wouldn't want us to feel this guilt. And that's something I have to tell myself. And another reason is that, as mentioned before, Pat was a silent sufferer. There's no way we could have known. And a big reason that people suffer silently is because we were, well, luckily, I think Waldick as a town has come a long way. We've been declared a stigma-free town. And, like we said, we started this program with our local high school to talk about mental health. So I believe Waldick has really has done a lot to show that we are an accepting town. We are an accepting community where if you have issues, please, you're not crazy. You're not a burden. You're not any of these things. Please, if you're ready, just speak your truth. But I think the stigma in a lot of places really keeps people down. They're afraid of what people will think. They're afraid of what their families will think. They're afraid to, be a burden. You're never a burden to the people you love, and that's a big message. That's one message we want to get across. But overall, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to need help, to seek help. And one of the biggest stigmas we hope to break is that and that's something I definitely experienced, that you have to be tough. You have to keep things inside and just trying to be strong and fight off your problems yourself, because that's the strong thing to do. Well, that's not the strong thing to do. It's not weak to want to get help. The strong, being willing to say that you can't do something on your own, that's the greatest display of strength that you can ever show, that you can ever muster. So that's something we want to encourage people to speak their truth. We want to encourage changes within our communities, whether they be with schools or at an overall broad community level. That's why we're here. And like Serena said, we want Pat to be here more than anything. I still, there's not a day that goes by when I don't think about him. I have dreams where he's in it and he's still around, and I wake up and it's just a bummer. We wish it wasn't the case that we started this foundation because of his passing, but with this foundation, we hope that when people hear his name, they feel hopeful. They feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this. We want the Pat Foundation. When people hear his name, like why I said when Pat was kind of a rock for people to lean on, Pat can be something that can help a bunch of people, like Pat did for his friends and the people he loved. I think actually, I'm going to be talking the next part. So I was going to say I might as well stop talking, but we can, unless Serena, you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, that was great.
Thank you. And now I want to talk about why. Obviously we can talk about how much this issue means to us, but this issue, the reason we're so big on it is, of course, because our friend passed, but because this is an issue that affects millions of people in this country and billions around the globe. Mental health, mental illness does not discriminate. It can affect anybody, no matter your income level, no matter what your background. It's something that is just a silent, it can be a silent killer. So if we go to the next slide, there's some statistics I want to highlight. And of course, there's sadly so many others that I could speak on, but I thought, not to overwhelm and drown people out with these. 1 in 5 adults in America experienced a mental illness. So think about, there's around 360 million people in the country. I'm not a big math person. I struggled to do math in college to fill that math requirement. So whoever's out there, you can do the math. That is millions, tens of millions of people who struggle with this. So this is something that isn't, just a few people who struggle with this. No, absolutely not. And that's why we emphasize you're not alone. No one's ever alone in this. More than 90% of people who die by suicide show symptoms of a mental health condition. So there are signs that are there. There are, again, silent sufferers. Some people, sure, they can be good at hiding it, but they can't really. It's hard for these people to kind of escape the reality, and then that's why people lead to do what they do. So with this in mind, this is a big reason why we want to encourage people to seek help, and why breaking the stigma will go a long way in getting people to seek help. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide and is a major contributor to the global burden of disease. The leading cause of disability. That is, I didn't know this before not too long. It's, like I said, not alone. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among children and adolescents aged 10 to 17 years in the United States, and one person dies from suicide every 40 seconds. It's even before COVID. This was a crisis, and it's even more a crisis today. And right now, because of COVID, a lot more people are suffering with mental health effects from staying indoors, the fear of the unknown, what was going to happen, losing their jobs. This fight is only getting tougher right now, which is why it's even more important now, more than ever, that we discuss this issue, bring light to this issue, and advocate as much as we can. In the next slide, there are some facts that, while the research is still yet to be done, we have some numbers on how COVID has been affecting people. Although, again, there's still more to be released by the scientific mental health community. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted or halted critical mental health services in 93% of countries worldwide. And prior to the pandemic, countries were spending less than 2% of their national health budgets on mental health. Think about, in our country, we have 360 million people. 1 out of 5 of those people struggle with mental illness. And if this is correct, we only spend 2% of our national health budget on mental illness. 2%, with tens of millions of people struggling with this. This is why I'm going to go on. I'm going to go on a long rant. During the pandemic, about 4 in 10 adults in the United States have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder, a share that has been largely consistent up from 1 in 10 adults who reported these symptoms from January to June. And a lot of people don't consider addiction a mental illness, but it definitely is. A lot of people are turning to ways to escape. Like I said before, about people who are struggling with mental illness just want to find an escape. And when they can't when they're too afraid to seek help through conventional means, people will turn to substances to kind of quell that pain. And with COVID, we're seeing that hike. Which is why speaking out on this issue is incredibly important. Why more than 2% needs to be invested on this issue. Between April and October 2020, hospital emergency departments saw a rise in the share of total visits that were from kids for mental health needs. It's hard to read all these things, but it's important because once we understand how much of an issue this is, definitely I can speak for myself. This lights an even greater fire under me to get something done, to fight for those who feel that they can't express themselves, express their pain, and are afraid to really use their voice and just seek the help that they need. Next slide, please. In closing, spreading awareness to the mental health crisis is more important now than it has ever been, and we must all do our part by having the tough conversations and combating the stigma that we see within our society. This is our mission at People Are There, and through advocacy and education, we hope to accomplish that mission. Serena, if you have anything else you want to add.
People Are There. We're continuing to grow so much. We became official in November 2019, and I'm very proud of what we've accomplished, especially in the times of COVID. But as Joe was saying before, now more than ever, like, this is what's needed. We need to, shine light on mental health. We need to make this aware that this is so important, especially in this world today, and that it's okay to seek help. It's okay to seek help. It's okay to literally just be like, I'm not okay. There's so many amazing resources out there. There's us, there's so much out there, and I just want people to know that they're not alone. So just making mental health a priority, a big priority. That's what we're striving to do, and educating that as well. But otherwise, just thank you to the Bergen Newbridge Medical Center Foundation and the young professionals for having us here today. And thank you for all the people who are tuning into this panel.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope so. Hello, my name is Darian Eletto. I'm here from Bergen Newbridge Medical Center. Thank you so much for having me on behalf of the Medical Center, and happy Mental Health Awareness Month. You can go to the next slide. So today we're going to be talking about suicide prevention and coping skills. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about who I am and what I do. Why am I here to talk to you today about something so important? So I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. So I'm a dual licensed clinician in the state of New Jersey. And my role at the medical center is wellness navigation specialist. So what I do specifically is I work for the grant called SPR. So that grant is Suicide Prevention and Response. And that is a federal grant that was gifted to the medical center, as well as our partnership with Care Plus. And we work with clients who are ages 25 and older who have a history of suicidal ideation or suicide attempt. Could be a history, could be recent. And we focus on the ages 25 and older because we recognize that there is a need for individuals who are suffering from their mental illness and having these kinds of symptomatology, that there is a specialized need. So the grant was created due to the profound impact that COVID-19 has had on our population and on mental health for everyone in the country. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of information. Now, these are actually infographics from SAMHSA. This is the 2019 data. And as you'll see on these two different graphs, you're going to see on the left, we have an image of the United States, and it says adults with a relevance or I can't really see it on my screen and on your screen, but prevalence, sorry. I thought it said prevalence. A prevalence of mental illness. And New Jersey is number 1 in the country. And on the right side of the screen, you're going to see adults who've had serious suicidal ideation. Now, we might not be number 1, but we are number 5 here in New Jersey. And there's a lot of things that can contribute to why New Jersey is ranked so high on these 2 separate graphs. Now, although this might be 2019 data, and I'm sure we're going to see a difference in data from when we get our 2020 data, what we are going to have to consider is that based on social, economic, and environmental factors, we are going to see a prevalence of mental illness. Now, some of these things might be, we live near New York City, one of the most impacted areas in the country from COVID. We also notice that there is cost of living is very high, although there is much more access to care in New Jersey. It is more costly, it can be more difficult. And also we have to consider that the pace of life is very fast. So mental illness can be triggered by a lot of these different factors. Next slide, please. So some other stressors that might impact our mental health, fear of the virus and the unknown. I'm sure we all can identify with the idea, every single day we're getting new information. The CDC comes out with new guidelines, with new information. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and that can really be difficult for us to cope with at times. We also all know social isolation has been a big issue, especially during COVID. And we also have an increased use or oversaturation of technology. Now, as great as technology has been in connecting all of us together, there's a real difficulty because there is such a thing as too much. Now, if we all have too much of that, too much Facebook, too much Instagram, it doesn't really add up to be a good thing sometimes. We're also going to notice an increase in substance use to cope with amplified fear. So increase in alcohol. We can also see an increase in other substance and other illicit drugs. Distancing from family and friends, loss of our support systems. Also a lot of grief and loss related to the death of loved ones. For many people, they weren't able to see their loved ones who had COVID-19 and who maybe tragically died from COVID-19. But also too, people who had other serious physical complications, not being able to see their loved ones when they were sick, not being able to be there for them. And also for many, the loss of employment, the loss of financial stability. There's also a fear of seeking care and support. I can speak to this personally from the hospital level. A lot of people were apprehensive to go to the hospital. They were afraid of what they might be exposed to, not knowing who has COVID there. So when we did have people come in to receive services, many of our patients did have more severe symptomatology. So had they maybe gotten help earlier in their symptoms, perhaps it wouldn't have been so as exacerbated as it was. So we did see how this play out in the mental health field. We also see people staying home for too long. It's not super healthy for us to be home in the same 4 walls. We needed a little bit of change of scenery. And we also have financial stressors, again, due to lack of unemployment, maybe a change in finances, and also the lack of access to care. I'm sure many of us can identify with going to the doctor is not the same as it used to be. We used to walk in, give our name to the front desk staff, and then all of a sudden we just sit in the waiting room. Not anymore. We have to go through COVID screenings, waiting in our car, getting our temperatures taken. So sometimes people might be too frustrated or too overwhelmed with the process of going to the doctor and instead stay home. Next slide, please. This slide is actually really important, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to all talk about this. These are some common misconceptions about suicide. And before we get into these, I want to say suicidal ideation is not a brand or a label. It's a sign that an individual is suffering deeply and must seek treatment. It's misinformation, like the myths that we're going to talk about now, that can prevent people from getting the help they need to get better and to reduce the ideas and to reduce suicidal ideation. So the first myth that we have here is that suicide only affects individuals with mental illness. It's actually not true. Many individuals with mental illness are not affected by suicidal thoughts, and not all people who attempt or die by suicide have a mental illness. Many factors can contribute to individuals experiencing suicidal ideation. These things might be relationship problems, physical illness, trauma, rejection, legal matters, and eviction or loss of home. The next one we have here is once an individual is suicidal, they will always be suicidal. Not true. The fact is active suicidal ideation is often short-term and situational. Studies have shown that 54% of those who have died by suicide did not have a diagnosable mental health condition. Now, for those with mental illnesses and diagnoses, by getting the proper help, we can reduce the symptomatology, which in turn can reduce the suicidal ideation. And the act of suicide is often an attempt to control a deep and painful emotion. Once these thoughts dissipate, though, the suicidal ideation will most likely go away, and suicidal thoughts can return, but they're not permanent. You know, an individual with suicidal thoughts and a history of suicidal attempts can live a full and healthy life. The next myth we're going to talk about is most suicides happen suddenly and without warning. Actually not true. There are normally a number of warning signs that an individual who is suicidal will present to their loved ones or even those around them. The most important thing is knowing the signs to look for, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. And, you know, knowing what symptoms to look for is so important in making sure that that individual gets the help that they need. The next myth is people who die by suicide are selfish and take the easy way out. Not true. Typically, people who die by suicide, they don't die because they are selfish or they want to just make a rash decision. It's normally because they've been suffering with very intense, deep emotional pain for a long time, and they see this as a way to relieve that pain. You know, these individuals are suffering so deeply that they feel hopeless and helpless, and individuals who experience suicidal ideation don't do so by choice. They're going through very serious mental health symptoms that can be treated. And the last and most important myth I want to talk about is talking about suicide will lead to and encourage suicide. I hear this all the time in the mental health field. It's not true at all. Talking about suicide not only reduces stigma, but it also helps individuals seek help. It also helps people rethink their options and share their story with others. We all need to talk more about suicide. As a society, we need to not be afraid of talking about suicide because the more that we keep it a secret, the more it keeps us sick. Okay. Next slide. So these might be some warning signs or symptoms of suicidal ideation and just, you know, something to be aware of. Do you recognize any of these in your thoughts? Recognize any of these in yourself, in your loved ones? Don't be afraid to talk about it. Again, we need to have these conversations. They are so important. So some symptoms you might see are, you know, they might be verbal signs, they might be behavioral signs, or maybe they might be some emotional signs. So this is an infographic from the National Institute of Mental Health. It's really easy to read, concise. That's why I think it's such a great resource. But some things you might want to be looking for is isolating yourself from loved ones. We might see somebody feeling hopeless or trapped. They might be talking about death and suicide. They also might be giving away their possessions. So maybe something that is very dear to them, something they treasure greatly. We could witness an increase in substance use or misuse. We also can see mood swings that include anger, rage, very irritable. There also is, there might be some engaging in risk-taking behaviors, driving recklessly, perhaps having unprotected sex, maybe engaging in behaviors like stop taking their medication altogether. There's a lot of risky behaviors that we might see as warning signs. We can also see somebody who's accessing the means, which we talk about, having means or access to something that could be potentially deadly to them. Maybe they're collecting pills, having access to a firearm. You might also see them, you know, perhaps using illicit substances. You also might see somebody acting as if they're saying goodbye. You could also have somebody who's feeling very anxious. And sometimes for some people, there is a presentation that they have a sense of calm, relief. Sometimes we do see that. There's a sudden improvement. That might also be an indication. Okay, next slide, please. And these are some risk factors. So these are some things that might contribute to somebody being at higher risk to completing suicide. So this is from the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. And again, really concise information. I want to make sure that everyone can take away just a little bit of information from this. Some risk factors might be a history of a diagnosis of a mental health condition. That could be substance use, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, maybe a conduct disorder or an anxiety disorder. Somebody who might have serious health conditions could also be at high risk for suicidal ideation. That could be chronic pain, traumatic brain injuries. Somebody who has access to lethal weapons or drugs, access to controlled substances might also be a risk. Prolonged stress, such as harassment, bullying, relationship problems, or unemployment. We also see stressful life events like rejection, financial crisis, life transitions, or loss. Now, I'm sure we've all experienced these kinds of things within the past year, but we do kind of see that in response to COVID-19, more people are having these kinds of experiences, which is why we do see an increase in suicidal ideation and suicide attempts among many people. So a history of a previous suicide attempt could be an indicator, could be another risk factor contributing to suicidality, family history of suicide, and also childhood abuse, neglect, or trauma. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of get into the more fun stuff, the coping skills stuff. So just to kind of preface this section, coping skills are a lot of trial and error. It's all about finding what fits for you. So what fits for somebody else might not fit for you, but always be trying something new, something different. It's okay to try things that are outside of the box. It's all about finding what fits for you. So this is an activity I like to use in some of my groups. I do run a suicide prevention group on the inpatient level in the hospital. So I like to use this sometimes with our patients. This is a coping tree. Now, how can we build a toolbox? We use the term toolbox a lot in therapy. What is your go-to for when you do have these kinds of triggers, when you do have things that you're not coping with well? What are your go-tos? So how we might start to talk about building a toolbox is, how do you think? Do you think positively? Do you think negatively? Is your thinking rooted in reality? And what are your thought patterns? Where do you go for help? Who or where do you go when you need support? How do you maintain yourself? What does your daily self-care look like? And we're going to get into self-care a little bit later. What do you do with your time? Do you have a balance between work and pleasure? What does your work-life balance look like? And where does your strength come from? Who or what motivates you to keep going? Next slide, please. This is another really great activity I think is really helpful for many clients. We talk about different types of coping skills. So here we have different types of coping skills that we can use. A few of these are actually DBT skills, dialectical behavioral therapy, and that's focused mainly on emotion regulation, which is super helpful, especially if we're dealing with a lot of intense emotions. So what I like to encourage everyone to do is look at these different types of coping skills. If we take away the examples that are listed below, self-soothing, distraction, opposite action, emotional awareness, and mindfulness, what would you put in there? What would be your toolbox? What would be in your kit? What self-soothing activities could you do? What distractions could you do? Instead of feeling one emotion, what's an opposite, healthier emotion you could feel? How do you build emotional awareness? What are the feelings that you're focusing on? So this is just something to consider when we talk about coping skills. Again, find what fits for you. Not everyone is going to have the same coping skills. And again, if something works for somebody else and not you, it doesn't mean it's a wrong coping skill. It just doesn't mean it's a fit. Next slide, please. So again, different types of coping skills. Some interpersonal coping skills we might use is reconnect with your social supports virtually, if you can. Now that we see that some of the COVID restrictions are lifting, we do have the opportunity to hopefully see our friends and loved ones a little bit more. Maybe we can see them in person, which is awesome. Seek and accept help. If you have mental health, if you're struggling with your mental health, if you have a diagnosis, don't be afraid to ask for help. And even if you don't have a formal diagnosis, seek help. There's so many resources out there. We are so fortunate in Bergen County that we are resource rich. There's so many ways that we can get access to care. Give back and help others. Participate in social networking, even if you can do it in person now that our COVID restrictions are lifted. Engage. Share emotions with someone trusted. Don't be afraid to reach out. Who's on your team? Who's in your support network? Who can you reach out to? So if you are struggling, you can talk to them. Use your community resources. You can also use cultural or ethnic traditions and identity as a support aid. And find a role model or a mentor, someone you can go to who can help you when you do have struggles, when you are having a more difficult time. Next slide, please. Physical coping skills. I know a lot of people like to use exercise as a coping skill. That is fantastic. Whatever your relationship with movement is, all it takes is 7 minutes for our brain to start creating endorphins. So if you can find a movement that you enjoy, that feels good, and you can engage in it for 10 minutes, it's a coping skill. Take care of your body, move, feel excited to reconnect with movement, especially after being kind of stationary for so long. Exercise regularly, get quality sleep. And what we mean by quality sleep is having good sleep hygiene, like making sure your sleep area is conducive to sleep. Is it cool? Is it calm? Is it dark? We also want to eat healthy. What we put in our body does matter. And avoid mood-altering drugs or the overuse of alcohol. Next slide, please. Emotional coping skills. So these are more focused on our feelings. So cultivate positive emotions. Use your hobbies. Reconnect with a hobby maybe that you used to love that you haven't done in a while. Create a bucket list of emotionally uplifting activities and do them. Develop long-term goals and start the journey. Use positive humor. Meditate, and meditation doesn't have to be the classic, sit, empty your mind and focus on just your breathing. Meditation could be so many different forms of things for people. I actually had a client once who said that their meditation was doing laundry. Sure, whatever helps you be present and in the moment, that's your meditation. And express gratitude. What I have up on the screen here is a gratitude journal. And what I love about this activity is it's super easy. All you need to do is find one thing each day of the week to be grateful for. And it doesn't have to be something gargantuan like today I climbed Mount Everest. It can be something as small as I'm grateful because today the weather was nice. I'm grateful today because I got to have, a phone call with somebody who I haven't spoken to in a while. Anything that you enjoy that you're grateful for goes on that gratitude list. And cultivating gratitude does also have a positive correlation with improved mood. Next slide, please. And these are some behavioral coping skills. So what we do are actions. So develop a routine. A routine can be something as simple as you wake up every morning and you make your bed. It might seem small, but these small accomplishments every day help us feel like we're achieving something. It makes us feel positive, like we're doing something to better ourselves. Small goals and small things add up to big things. So break large tasks into small, doable subtasks. Don't focus on the entire staircase. Just look at the stair in front of you. Take a news and social media holiday. Kind of hard to do since we're all connecting socially over Instagram and Snapchat and all those other fun technological apps. But social media can be self-help or self-harm. It's entirely up to you. It's so important that you curate your feeds and be mindful of how certain content affects you. Try intermittent social media fasting to reorient yourself to what's real and what improves your life instead of compulsively scrolling. And for some people, this also might be, I can only watch the news 10 minutes a day. I mean, think about watching the news for more than an hour. You're probably not going to get a lot of positive stuff. So sometimes people need to make a little bit of a boundary for themselves on those things. Establish a new normal routine. What does new normal look like in COVID times and how can it feel good? Read to find comfort, rekindle hope, and use positive religious spiritual ways of coping. Next slide, please. So as I said, we are going to talk about self-care. So a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between self-care and coping skills? So coping skills are your daily go-to tools that help relieve stress and improve your mood. Self-care is regularly scheduled maintenance that helps prevent and restore ourselves from stress. So self-care is a daily thing. So every day we have to incorporate self-care into our lives, and it could be 2 minutes, it could be 20 minutes, it could be 2 hours, however it fits for you. But self-care might look like these different kind of aspects. It might look at our sensory way of coping and caring for ourselves, being able to tune into the details of the sensations around us. They also might be emotional, being fully engaged with our emotions. Could be spiritual, which might be meditation, connecting to nature, however you find your spiritual connection. Social, so engaging with people and forming healthy bonds. And physical, maintaining a healthy body function. And some things I also wanted to talk about when we talk about nurturing our mental health, that's a daily routine. Just like our self-care, we have to constantly be taking care of our mental health, just like we take care of our physical health. So just some reminders, you are here, accept where you are and go from there. Don't try to please everyone. Leave something for yourself. We can't pour from an empty cup. So always make sure you're checking in with yourself. Laugh, look for opportunities to laugh. Laughter is great therapy. Laughter also is a chemical reaction in our brain. So once we laugh, we release feel-good chemicals. Take charge of yourselves. You can't control other people's actions. It's so important to remember that. We can't control a lot of what's going on around us, but we can control us, and there's power in that. Relax, create time, meditate, listen to music. Just find a calm in every single day. Again, however you fit it in, find that calm every day. Give yourself a break. Pause and do something for yourself. Even if it's something small and tiny, like making yourself a cup of tea or however little reward you want to give yourself, just do it for you. And you are not alone. Talk to somebody you trust. It's okay to reach out for help. Again, the more we talk about mental health and the more we talk about, having suicidal ideation, the better it is for everybody. Next slide, please. And I also just wanted to bring attention safety planning. So this is the Stanley Brown Safety Plan. Many people, if you've ever been in mental health treatment, maybe you've been in therapy, maybe you've been to Bergen Newbridge Medical Center, you might have seen this before. This is our safety planning template. Now, what you see in each of these components is something that we want to use when we feel as though we're in a mental health crisis. So there's different steps. The first step is warning signs. What might be some signs that you're heading towards a mental health crisis or that you might be starting to have suicidal ideation. It could be feelings, it could be a mood, it could be an action. What are some of your warning signs? The next step on it listed is internal coping skills. So what are coping skills you can do on your own that don't involve others? So maybe it's like knitting, doing a puzzle, those kinds of things. They just involve you. The next step we see is who's your support network? Who can you call? It could be a friend, a loved one, a family member. Also, where's a place you can go? I know in COVID times, it's not so simple to have a place you can go to, but now that the weather's getting warm, maybe there's a park you enjoy going to. If you feel safe there, that could be part of your safety plan. The next section we see is professional resources. So this would be a place you could put your therapist, your doctor, your psychiatrist. Who are the professionals you can reach out to? Also included here, you can see we have the suicide prevention hotline. There's also a lot of different resources you could use. Doesn't have to be the national one. It could be something more local. And the next one at the bottom is making the environment safe. So if you feel unsafe with yourself, how can you make that environment safe? For some people, it might be, making sure their senses aren't overstimulated. I had clients who tell me that, if they make their environment safe, that means making it calm, making it quiet in the room, dark maybe, so they're not overstimulated. For other people, it might mean calling somebody to sit with me, just having somebody there with me so I know that I'm okay. And at the bottom of the safety plan, what is one thing that makes life worth living for you? And that's all we ask our clients and our patients. What is one thing that makes you want to continue living? And it could be anything. It could be I have a goal. It could be my pet. It could be anything that makes you want to stay. Okay, next slide, please. And finally, seeking help. Utilize your resources. There's lots of different ways for us to get help for mental health these days. I think one thing that a positive outcome of COVID, if we can think of one, is that we now have access more directly to mental health services. You see apps like BetterHelp and Calm. These are great apps that can be used as coping skills. There are also access to different kinds of therapy. So, you could have a private therapist. You could have medication management with your psychiatrist. There's lots of peer support groups. I know NAMI has peer support groups. So a lot of peer support groups are actually starting to open up and meet in person, which is fabulous. Again, apps like Calm, BetterHelp, things that can help calm us all in the palm of our hand. Having our coping skills like we talked about, safety planning if we feel as though we need that, and hotlines. You see here I've listed the National Suicide Prevention Line. We have crisis text line like Krista was talking about earlier. We just in case somebody is uncomfortable calling and talking about these things, the sign of the times. Now we can text about it. And then we also have our Bergen County Psychiatric Emergency Screening Service, which is PESP, 201-262-HELP. They will come out, they will screen you, they will get you the help you need in that moment. And that's a great resource here in Bergen County. Next slide, please. And that is my presentations. Questions, answers?
Thank you, Darian, so much for speaking on behalf of Bergen Newbridge Medical Center. That was a really amazing PowerPoint. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open the floor to Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments that you would like to add, please put them in our comments section and we will have our speakers answer them. So our first question here today is for the Pat Foundation, and it is from Lou, and it says, did you ever find out what Pat was so worried about that pushed him to take his own life?
I never did. I'm very close with his family personally, but that's obviously something that, it's up to the family to discuss, and that just never came up. So I didn't know, but it could have been a number of things. It was at the time we all finished our first full year of college. It could have been stress from that. It could have been stress from, with friends, home. But sometimes just having a mental illness can really weigh down on you, in itself. mental illness doesn't necessarily just come from, it can come from a traumatic event. It can come from something that happens to you, but it could also be genetic. It could be passed down from family. So it could have been, could have been a number of causes, but personally, I've never had that opened up to me personally.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, and our next question is, what are some useful and effective ways to start a conversation with someone who is suicidal? So Darian, would you like to take this one?
Sure. I think this is a fabulous question. Thanks so much, Jordan, for asking that. A lot of the times I really encourage families and friends to, if they do see some of these things or some of these warning signs, sometimes it's okay to just open up the conversation with, are you okay? And mention things like, I've noticed maybe if you've seen they've been more angry lately, I've noticed you've been angrier than usual. Is everything okay? We don't have to really be confrontational. We just have to let somebody know, hey, I notice you and I see you and I'm here to help you.
Thank you, Darian. And we have one more other question for you from Megan.
Sure.
And it's, what are some coping strategies to use when losing someone to suicide?
Great question, Megan. And I'm so sorry if you have lost somebody from suicide. It's really difficult. A lot of the time, suicide can be a different way of grieving because we have a lot of questions and we feel as though we're not going to get answers to those questions. Some coping strategies might be to celebrate life. How can you continue that relationship with that person? Although they may be gone, we can still continue that relationship. And we just kind of have to go through the grief. And maybe we don't always we don't heal from that grief, but we grow around that grief. And we're going to go through that grief in different ways. And it's not going to look maybe as traditional as you might from losing somebody maybe to something more common, but some coping strategies might just be to sit with those feelings, process those feelings. And if you're having a hard time with those feelings, don't be afraid to go see a therapist. Grief is a really common experience for many of us, but when losing somebody to suicide, we do experience some maybe more different ways of experiencing the loss.
I'm going to bring on Serena and Joe as well to see what were some of their coping strategies when they lost Pat.
Serena, would you like to go first?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So when I lost Pat, I think a lot for me, it was surrounding myself with, especially my friend group, because we were all experiencing the same loss. So we were with one another and, it was a rough time for us, but we expressed our feelings so much. We got all the tears out. We just express everything we needed to, which was honestly a comfortable feeling. It was just nice to obviously know that we all had each other at the end of the day. But just like before, like what Darian was saying, just also seeking a therapist. I think it's so important to talk to someone, especially losing someone to suicide. You have some unanswered questions. You'll always be like, what didn't I see? What could I have done differently? So just having that trusted person, having someone specific to talk to, I think is very important. That's something that I definitely did when we lost Pat.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Megan, for the question. Definitely being around friends was very helpful to me. And one thing, Serena mentioned therapy. I was lucky to have my therapist there for me at the time. I was seeing this therapist since I was a freshman in high school. So she knew me. She knew how to talk to me. She knew then how to guide me through everything. So it was a combination of, speaking about with my friends, seeking their, kind of us getting together and just speaking our minds, speaking how we felt, and also professional help for me as well. So, and also just kind of tackling things personally. I talked about how I, kind of pushed some blame on myself for not seeing signs. I blame myself here and there, but I had to realize there was nothing I could have done. I couldn't. I didn't know, and I had no way of knowing. And also, I just had to tell myself, as long as we have the memories of the people we love, they're never really gone. They were a part of our lives. We have the memories to to revisit, to have them with us. So those were some things I told myself, and yeah, so that's how I coped through it.
Thank you both for sharing so much. So our next question is for Darian, and it is, do you start the conversation in a different way with different age groups?
Melissa, thank you so much for asking this question. It's a very good one. Obviously, we see that adults are not exclusively affected by COVID and, having suicidal ideation. Our children, our preteens, our teens, everyone is affected. Yeah, sometimes you do have to approach it in a different way for different age groups. Maybe for younger individuals, for children, for toddlers, you might need to approach it in a more simplistic way because perhaps their verbal skills aren't there yet. So we maybe want to be as simple and straightforward as possible. Hey, I've noticed, again, we want to be non-judgmental. We're coming from a place of caring. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Have you had thoughts about hurting yourself? Are you planning on hurting yourself? Again, trying not to be accusatory, but still meeting them where they're at. Obviously, with emotional age and hopefully with emotional maturity, we can approach it in a more complex way, a more, specialized way. But again, for different age groups, we might need to approach it in the most simplistic way.
Thank you, Darian, for sharing. Well, this is the end of our conversation. Thank you all so much for coming out again. If there's no more any questions or answer, like I said, thank you all so much for coming out again. A special thank you to our speakers, Serena Greco and Joe Turner from the People Are There Foundation, and Darian Eletto from Bergen Newbridge Medical Center. We are so glad that you all were able to come in and speak with us today, and thank you all so much, and have a wonderful evening.